hadn't watched this, probably wouldn't have. Oh, very good. Increase in inductions, that's probably the number one reason. Now, why did inductions go up? First of all, what's an induction? Just to make sure we're all on the same page.
When you forcefully go to labor. Medically. Yes.
It is when you force the mom's body to labor. Force is like not the best word, but I can't think of one to get the point across. You're inducing the process of labor instead of letting it happen naturally. Why are those more common now? Yes, they help us plan our lives because we're control freaks by a society standard. You've got to have control over everything.
Ultrasound.
Okay, yes, ultrasound.
But you can see, so I guess with me, they can see that my amniotic fluids have decreased, and so they're like, okay, it's time, let's go.
So they might pick up something like that where she's close to term or, but if we wait, it might get worse. So let's go ahead and induce, sure. They're also doing estimated weights a lot more on ultrasound, and I think that sometimes causes us to not wait till 40 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks, because all you're doing is letting that baby chunk up, which I think is a good thing, but, other people don't. Okay, why else? Let's see. Okay, so all those things cause the C-section rate to go up. What else has caused the C-section rate to go up? Tell me about how things have changed with NICU care since the 90s.
There's a lot different levels, like you have I don't know exactly all of the different levels, but like Jeff City only carries, unless you have your baby here, it's like a certain amount of weeks.
Okay.
Otherwise you're going to Columbia or something.
Okay. And what we call the age of viability keeps going earlier and earlier, okay? So probably in the 90s it was like 30 weeks. Now it's 24 weeks, and I think pretty soon they're going to change it to 23, which is insane. But think about that. Think about in the 90s and as we've gotten closer, stuff that we would used to say, sorry, there's nothing we can do, we can now say, let's do a stat C-section at 25 weeks and put the baby in the NICU. So, and they'll often C-section those moms because it's actually a less traumatic delivery than going through a vagina and a labor process if they're only 25 weeks. So I think the improvement of NICU care has also impacted. We also have way more fertility treatments going on. We have more twins, triplets, quadruplets, octuplets. That's going to cause a C-section, right? We don't usually deliver anybody over twins vaginally. And twins are usually only delivered vaginally if they're both head down. But when you start getting triplets and higher, you're going to C-section. So that's going to impact the rate, right? Okay. Now, I think, Carter, were you the one that said the increase and then decrease of C-section? Okay, so we just talked about the increase. You said decrease. So why, what are you relating to?
Recently there's been a slight decrease in rates of C-sections.
Why?
Because we're realizing that there is a correlation between mortality rates.
I think women are also fighting that now. I think there's a lot more of a focus now about patient-centered care and patient-centered decision-making. I think there was a big 15 or 20-year period where hospitals kind of just told you, oh, this is what we need to do, sign this, and they would do it, and they say the right things to scare you. And now I think there's a lot more of a focus on what does the patient want, and how can we avoid a C-section, etc. And that's good. It's good that we're heading back that direction. And let's always remember that C-sections are not a bad thing, but they've been misused for quite a while, and to a large degree. Do you guys know what the C-section rate is in the United States? Approximately. It's about 32%, 33%. It's about 1 in 3 babies. And to me, a big driver of the continued C-section rate is a lot of providers, once you've had one C-section, they'll just have you do a repeat one the next time. I feel like they are starting to offer more for moms who've had one C-section to do what's called a trial of labor for the opportunity at an EVAC, vaginal birth after cesarean. But a lot of doctors aren't comfortable with that, or hospitals aren't. So that's something I think we could work on as well.
Which I think that too, because whenever like I was having a C-section, she had had multiple C-sections. And like all the scar tissue that they were cutting through, no.
I know somebody who had, I think it was the fifth one. This just makes me sick to think about. The doctor didn't even have to cut her uterus. He had, he took his fingers and just went like this.
Oh, geez.
And I just think, what if she had gone another week and her, like, yeah. So,
I don't
again,
believe that for it, I have a few friends who had, like, once they got to the point, their section.
well, and I get scared too because there's some people who have, you know, the belief system of like, we want as many babies as the Lord blesses us with, that kind of thing. And so if their first or second is a C-section, they're not thinking about baby 5, 6, or 7. But just like you're saying, you get there, the doctors are gonna start saying, you know, and that is such a discrepancy with their belief system. But it's one of those kinds of things I think that are detrimental. Okay, what else? What other trends or topics, issues? Okay, first of all, I have to say too, of all semesters, there's a huge issue that you guys lived through this summer that's massive for maternity nursing. Yes, that's a huge, we can call that an issue, right? The overturn of Roe versus Wade. Now, that's more of a women's health topic, right? However, doesn't that impact what we're talking about? Yes. That's a huge, and I think obviously that just happened. We're gonna see a lot of repercussions at the state level. We already have, but we're gonna keep seeing it, right? As the 50 different states debate how to handle that topic. But that's huge. No other class have I had that we've been able to talk about that this early. Okay, what else?
My friends call them the rise of hippie birds.
Ooh, tell me about
So
those.
like, water.
Crunchy granola people?
Yeah, water-based births, so
Okay.
water birthing, the mom delivering the baby, pulling the baby out.
Are they at a
Home
hospital or at
births,
home?
No, at home.
Okay. So home births have kind of been a debated issue. You know, some people say how unsafe they are, other people say they're so safe, why are we letting people do this? Which is how this country operates right now, right? We only our extremist views nowadays. So yes, that's a topic, and that's also a state, you know, just like our licenses as RNs are regulated by our state, so too for midwives and birth attendants. Related to that though, what I see happening to keep up with that trend is, have you guys noticed that hospitals are really trying to focus on having midwives on staff so they can have a low intervention program? That is amazing. That to me is really the happy medium we should be aiming for, is that all women, I'd like more people to be comfortable giving birth in a hospital, but to be able to deliver with the provider they want in a low intervention way, but they're connected to a hospital in case something goes awry. That to me is the win-win. You got all the resources, but you don't have all the interventions being forced down your throat the entire time.
Hospitals are also becoming more of a lower intervention rooms as well.
Have what?
Like the rooms are lower intervention as well.
Yes. Which is a great trend. Yeah, we're backfiring from the high C-section interventionist view. It's taken a long time to get here. It's taken a lot of what people call birth trauma to move back that other direction. I typically, when I do this lecture, talk about how OB has a pendulum with lots of issues. We swing really far one way, and that doesn't go well, so we backfire, and it just keeps going. When you talk to your mothers, grandmothers, etc., there was a time window, I think it was in the 70s, they used to just knock moms out, give everyone an episiotomy, and pull them out with forceps. Didn't matter, like, that's just what they did with everyone. And that sounds insane to me, that sounds archaic, but that's the way they did it. So, you may hear some moms talk about after they had babies, they put a heat lamp between their legs to help with healing. That was in the 80s. And then all of a sudden one day they stopped doing that. So there's lots of stuff. At one time I was told with preterm labor, this is crazy to me, they would insert alcohol into their IV because it would help relax the uterus. And I'm like, wait, you're told not to drink during pregnancy and we're treating preterm labor with alcohol. But that was before they really had really good, we still don't really have good pharmacology agents, but before they had something better. That's insane. But that was what was going on at the time. Okay, what else is a trend? Well, besides the birth itself, anything different about what we do now compared to what you hear family members talk about?
Skin to skin, we're talking about.
Yes, that's hugely different, and that's a good change. What they used to do.
Just put them under a over, so.
Have you guys talked to anyone, like, I don't know how old your grandmas and great grandmas are, but there's a lot of times, like in the 50s, they would just take the baby to the nursery and the mom would not see it the entire hospital stay. Everyone was bottle fed, and they just fed them in the nursery.
Actually, like, just like now, whenever I was little, my grandma went to the hospital, so I always made like a note to go to the nursery and like look through the window and the amount of babies that there were whenever I was little, and then now you go,
You're
and
right.
there's never any babies.
And the concept of going to look in the nursery, even that has changed. Because both Cap Region and St. Mary's, they don't really have a big window to go look at like they used to. There is a window if they needed it for like a baby that's being, having extra treatments or can't come out. But it's not like it used to be. Every hospital used to have a big giant window and you could go look at the nursery, right? And see 30 or 40 babies. That doesn't exist anymore. It's very different. Where are the babies instead?
In the rooms.
In the rooms, yeah. Has anybody heard of the term baby-friendly hospital? Baby-friendly hospital initiative? You ever heard somebody say, oh, that's a baby-friendly hospital? No one? Okay. Well, look it up. But that came about in the 90s. I feel like it really took off in the 2000s. But it's a distinguishing, it's something you have to work for as a unit to get that distinguished.
Accreditation is what it says.
It's like an accreditation, yeah.
Weird.
But it's got all these rules and guidelines that are trying to be more supportive of breastfeeding outcomes. So one of them is that the baby should be in the mom's room 23 out of 24 hours of the day. So procedures should be done there. Doctors should come out to the room, not to the nursery. Another one is that formula samples should not be sent home with breastfeeding families. Why do you think that is?
These are nurses.
Have you guys ever heard that the first credit card you get in college is like the one people keep forever, it's like the first one? That's what they say about like formula, that if you, even if breastfeeding is going well, if you say, here's a gift pack for you just in case, if you're the first formula that gets into someone's house, they stick with you. And so when there's long nights or difficult feedings, instead of trying to problem solve through it, or know that there's ups and downs, some people will say, oh, breastfeeding's not working, at least I have some formula, I'll just think about it. And again, not that formula is bad, but a lot of times formula is introduced when it's not necessary. And then you put a wrench in the breastfeeding process. Other trends or issues?
I've seen, just kind of piggybacking off of Kyrie's answer, but having, instead of wards, you have these birthing suites. So you have labor and delivery in one room and recovery all in the same place.
And a lot of hospitals are going to like a spa-like theme, so all the medical stuff is hidden. Like in the labor rooms, they'll put the oxygen and epidural stuff like behind this moving, so it doesn't look medical. And I'm sometimes like, okay, but we're still in a hospital. Like, did anybody notice that's where we are? But yeah, there's definitely a interior design component to it.
I think we were just seeing an increase in the decrease of breast or formula.
Yeah, well, and it goes in little swings because, like, when I had my kiddos, it was really big into like breastfeed only, support, you know, the baby friendly thing was huge. But then there was kind of a backfire, and it's that because what ended up happening is people who either didn't breastfeed or couldn't felt kind of marginalized, like they were bad, because there was such a focus on breast is best and all this stuff. And so now I kind of feel like we're going back the other way, and the lactation consultants around here have told me there's a huge increase in the number of moms who come into the hospital and say they're going to do both. Usually people will say I'm going to breastfeed or I'm going to formula. But basically there's a huge uptick in people just saying I'm going to do both. Which again is not bad, but it's definitely a trend. And I think it's kind of a backfire on the breast only. I guess there was probably an era where there was probably some shaming of people who were breastfeeding or they felt that way. So now I feel like moms have kind of pushed back and they'll hear people say fed is best. You know. So feeding's definitely that's another thing to talk to your family members about if these things are interesting to you. My grandma's about to turn 90 and she had 6 kids between 1957 and 1970. And she formula fed. And you know why? That was the scientific, safe, healthy thing to do then. Did you know that? Breastfeeding was what poor people did, and if you could afford formula, that was the best thing to do. So when my cousins and I started having kids in the 2000s, and that's when breastfeeding was really like, she said one time, I don't know if she said I feel bad, but she goes, no one did it back then. It was, the thing to do was to formula feed. And so then when you're hearing all these things about how good breastfeeding is, I think she felt kind of like, did I feel my children, you know? But again, the pendulum switches every couple generations. But I think that's fascinating that when formula came out, it was considered better, safer, healthier. It really wasn't. It wasn't, but it took a while to realize that. It was cool and new at the time. So.
And now we have formula, like, oh gosh, like, you can't find it in the stores, they're completely sold out.
Thank you. That is another, I forgot about that. This summer, that was a huge news story. And that was that was a fascinating issue because formula's always been our backup. Right? I mean, there were people volunteering to give their breast milk to people who were formula feeding because they couldn't find it. That's crazy. That was a definite intriguing news story this summer. Does anybody know anybody affected by the formula drug?
They couldn't, their baby needed a specific formula. They had like their mom.
So somebody was buying
Someone was able to
Yeah.
find like one, it was like, yeah.
Yeah.
And my friend was doing like paid huge amounts for it, they were calling it liquid.
Oh, yeah. So that's intriguing, for sure. And that's never happened that I've ever heard of, ever. There's always been plenty of formula.
Like you were talking about earlier, I can't remember who I was talking to, but they were telling me about how, like back in the day when they would have their kid, maybe my grandma or something, they like you said, put them asleep and they had the kid, and she said that she like woke up the next day and like got to meet a baby bed because she was still out of it.
I always think about like speech to birth type of stuff because like now, as soon as you're born, they put all the bands on. But like in that, if you're asleep, Like, how scary, because you don't actually, I don't know, it just
Yeah,
makes
she
you
said she didn't even like.
Yeah. They could have brought a different baby, you know.
Well, that's the difference of support people being there.
Yes.
My mother-in-law has 12 boys. Her husband's the youngest, and with her first 4, I think, he wasn't allowed to be anymore.
In the room. My grandma still tells the story. She had her babies at the hospital, but there was one night, my grandpa was asleep in the chair, like in the middle of the night, and they needed to check her cervix, and they woke him up and made him leave the room. And I was like, how do they think she got pregnant? Like, that is insane. And he's asleep, you know, he couldn't even do it.
He wasn't even looking.
Yes! But that is insane, right? So where we are now. Okay, let's see. Here's a question. This topic keeps coming up, especially in different countries. What are your guys' thoughts on whether a mom, because this is a difficult debate, should be able to request a C-section? Like by request. What's called a primary elective C-section.
I think if it is within the right to ask for it, but I also think that we should have better education on how it's going to be allowed. They should have their because I feel like the education is significantly lacking if that's going to be something that's just.
So one side is her body, her right, right? Makes sense. Okay? What would be the other side though? Who might argue against that, or why might somebody say, no, I don't think you should be able to request a C-section?
There's another life.
What?
There's another life to think about, like the babies.
Oh, life, I'm sorry. I thought you said another wife, and I'm like, okay, sure, let's talk about that. Yes, there's another life, okay.
Yeah.
What else though? Let's play the devil's advocate for this.
It's a major surgery.
It is a major surgery.
Well, and like, vaginally is your body's natural way. That's how the woman's body was, made to do that, and versus just cutting the baby out.
Just for infections, things like that.
So, no matter how beautiful of a C-section they do, no matter how perfect they do, you cannot get away from the statistics that infection and complication rates are typically about double for mom and baby. Now, they're still really low, but they're still higher than vaginal deliveries, okay? So what else would be the arguments against just a mom saying?
They're expensive.
They are expensive. They have a longer recovery time, longer hospital stays. Okay, let me ask you this. So I think most people would agree with if she's educated, it's her body, if she knows the risks. Okay, what do you think actually happens though in this country more often than not, even if someone's educated? We don't like in this country when something in healthcare goes wrong, and we want to blame someone. So I think what often happens is people like to talk the talk, and they want what they want until it doesn't go well, and then they want to blame other people for the decision that they made. I think that happens all the time in so many aspects, all over social media. But when you're talking about 2 lives, that's risky. So I see both sides of it. I totally see, like, you can't make a mom push a baby out. You can't make her go through labor if she, like, that's a procedure too.
Well, and like you said earlier, like society has just changed that everything has to be like, fast. They want to know the schedule. Like everything.
Well, and everyone, I mean, I don't mean to be blunt, but I feel like we live in an era of it's my right. I want this, so make it happen. Yes, everywhere, everything. It's kind of scary to me. Like, I hope that World War III never happens because I don't think as a country we're prepared to like help each other. the way that we handled COVID as a country shows how much we're willing to just focus on ourselves and not the bigger issue. So, yeah, I think people want what they think they want until it goes wrong and they want to blame someone and get a couple $1 million because they're get it done. So, and we live, sadly, in a very litigious society as far as healthcare goes. So I think that's the difficult part. If we could actually get people to sign understanding the risks, and if something goes wrong, they know this, you know, then I think it would be fine. But I think that's where providers get stuck, is what the patient wants versus what is truly safest. So keep an eye out for that topic, though. It's a difficult one. There's no right answers in a lot of these topics. To give you a perspective, you guys know that like China has had laws for a long time on birth rates, right? The C-section rate in China recently has been close to 50%. And one of the reasons is because a lot of those moms only need to have one child. And so a lot of them say, I'm only going to have one kid, why can't I choose how it's going to be born? Why would I want to go through labor if I don't have to? And so they have a pretty darn high C-section rate there for that. So, okay. What's changing about moms? What is changing OB healthcare because of how moms in the U.S. are changing? What's changing?
For more gestation,
Except
for working more,
they're working more?
age.
Age. What is changing about age?
Older.
So I keep saying these are young, healthy moms, right? At some point, I'm probably gonna have to stop doing that, sadly, and accept that I'm technically an offshoot of this surge at some point, because it is changing. What are we doing differently?
Education.
What
Education.
the moms are?
Well, societies that have a higher education rate and college graduation rate have older maternal gestation ages.
The last I read, the average age of a first-time mother in the U.S. was 26, which when you first hear that, I don't think sounds very old, but that's the average. Okay, so you take all the 17, 18, 19, 16-year-olds, and 26, that's the highest you've ever had as the average. A lot of women are opting to have either no children or they're delaying having children until way later than we used to. Fertility treatments, I think those kind of go hand in hand. I think we're seeing more advanced science, but I also think when you wait to have children longer, you're gonna have more trouble getting pregnant. That is something that we know. Now, it depends on if you're talking about 30 versus 40, but we know that that's a known statistic. The older you are, typically, it's harder to get pregnant. Not for everyone. I took care of somebody who was 47 and spontaneously got pregnant unexpectedly. That's crazy. And then fertility treatments for a long time also led to more multiples, right? They've gotten that science much more perfected. I don't think we hear about as many twins, triplets, and quads for fertility treatments as we once did. Fertility treatments are also having higher success rates than they once did. Okay, so what does having older moms also cause? Riskier pregnancies. What else? Why are they riskier?
Just like older, so they're more high risk.
Why are they more high risk because they're older though?
Plus, they might have other, like when you're younger, you know, you don't really have most of the time you don't have as many illnesses. But then
Correct. So we're seeing way more chronic conditions in moms that then have to be managed through a pregnancy and through delivery. And then that is increasing maternal mortality rates. How else are moms changing besides age? How do you think moms look different than the moms in the sixties and seventies?
Our whole society is going via these new
Yes. That's changed things drastically, and that goes hand in hand with chronic illnesses, right? So we have older, larger, sicker moms. And that's by average, of course. Plenty of ones that are young and healthy without chronic conditions, but if you average out what the landscape looks like for women giving birth in this country, we're older, we're sicker, we're larger. And that leads to more problems. That also leads to higher C-sections. Okay, couple of evidence-based practice trends. There's a lot of research and implementation of delaying the first bath for 24 hours. There's a lot of research on how the microflora of the skin that the baby picked up when it came through the mom is helpful. There's a lot of research that it reduces skin conditions like eczema if you delay the first bath, so that's something you may hear more about. Another debate you'll hear in research is that there's a lot of discussion about how we should truly be doing birth weight. Obviously, we've often done it right after birth, but why do you think there's debate of whether that's accurate? Why do you think they're re-examining that?
The baby has been like had a lot more fluids.
Why?
Because they were drinking and more fluid, so that's why it significantly decreases in the first.
Yep.
Being in the hospital, babies weight always way lower.
It's usually because the hospitals load moms up with IV fluids, so that plumps everything up. And so if you think about it, if you do a weight right after delivery, how much of that's urine sitting in the baby's bladder? You know, and if there's a few ounces or whatever, that makes a big difference. Now, why do we care? Why do we care about making the birth weight more accurate if indeed the way we're doing it is wrong? Why is that a big deal? Yes, we use that baseline for a lot of stuff, like knowing if they're eating enough or if they need to be supplemented. So ounces make a huge difference. Any other thoughts or questions before I move forward? Delayed cord clamping, very good. That's another research-based topic is there's a lot of research into should we be clamping the cord right away or should we wait a little while? And if so, what time frame? And what's the benefits? Or are there benefits? Good one. Okay. So now we're going to keep talking about trends. Before we do that, make sure we're all aware of morbidity versus mortality. So with morbidity, it's usually focused on the proportion that a disease affects the population. And then when we talk about mortality, it's focused on deaths. So the proportion of deaths to a population within a region. Any questions on that? Okay. So let's first talk about infant mortality. And I want to make sure you catch the definition here. So with infant mortality, we're talking about the number of deaths of infants under a year of age for every 1,000 live births. That makes a difference because when we do maternal mortality, it's gonna be a different number. So with infant mortality, for every 1,000 live births, how many deaths occur before the age of 1? Okay, there's lots of causes. Here they are. So birth defects. Preterm birth. And then also low birth weight, or sometimes exclusive. Mom having complications of pregnancy. Sudden infant death syndrome. And then injuries and accidents. So what are some examples of injuries and accidents that can cause a baby's death before the age of 1? Did you say falling down the stairs? Okay. Shaken baby syndrome. So abuse. What is it? Yeah. So it could truly be an accident, like, I mean, I've heard of people who like set their baby on a table, just thought they were laying a baby that can't sit up, down, laying it down, and then, they somehow rolled or something else. There could be drownings, like in the bathtub or in a pool.
Car seat, like suffocation.
Yeah, or even bedtime suffocation.
Is that? I know that
Usually with SIDS, especially if it's not a safe sleep environment, maybe a little bit like suffocation. If they can identify, when I worked for WIC in Osage County a few years ago, and before I worked there was a infant death, and the baby was sleeping with the parents and got twisted up in the sheets. So I don't think they're gonna call that SIDS because they were able to. Usually SIDS though is even in safe sleeping conditions. A death occurs and it's not obvious what it is. They've looked a lot more into the pathophys of what occurs during SIDS and they know more than they used to. But it really can come out of nowhere sadly. That was a good question. Okay, so we can use some updated statistics. So you have 5.8 per thousand for 2017. For 2018, it was 5.6.
5.6 what?
Deaths per thousand live births. So 2018, 5.6 was the infant mortality rate in the US. For 2019, it was 5.5. And 2020 was 5.4. Now, those don't sound like big differences, but they are. And what trend do you notice? Okay, so I always say that anything over 0 is too high. However, for a while now, as a country, we have slowly trended down with our infant mortality rate. So that's good, right? We should keep going that direction. So I think you should know that. That for infant mortality rates, we're trending down. Okay. What is bad, however, is that when you look at us compared to other nations with similar birth rates, this is what we look like. Now this is a little bit old. It's actually kind of a lot old. But you guys get the point, right? Look where we are, and look at other countries with similar birth rates. And what do you notice? On this list, right? And there's other countries way higher than us. But why is that a problem?
Our population. We have so many resources in this.
Yes. Ours should be easily the lowest. We put billions and trillions of dollars into healthcare to fix people's like broken hearts that need quadruple bypass, but we're awful at doing preventative stuff to take care of moms and babies. Awful. That's backwards, isn't it? Shouldn't you take care of the people that have some ability to be saved maybe first, and then use resources? Not that I'm demeaning the value of a 75-year-old smoker who needs surgery, but let's think about the realistic, what are we gonna get out of that? What are they gonna get out of that? Quality of life? Not really sure. What if we put more money into prenatal care and access to prenatal care? And postpartum visits? How much could we reduce this?
Are postpartum visits something that are happening? Is that something that
In
all
some
parents use?
places, but again, they're preventative
Yeah.
and they're wellness-based, and we as a country would rather put $100,000 into a chemotherapy drug or a type of cancer that happens 1 in a million than we would on something as simple as we're not good at public health stuff. Now, when Obamacare came out in 2008, one of the big stipulations was trying to turn that Titanic around and trying, instead of hospitals being where sick people go, one of the goals of Obamacare was to try to get hospitals to help take care of the health of populations and keep them out of hospitals. I think there's some progress, but we still have a long way to go. We're much better at wasting money on things than doing preventative things.
I just have never heard of.
Yeah, they're not commonly done around here. There are some places, and my dream would be, I don't know if you guys know much about WIC, but WIC does a really nice job with breastfeeding support. And it used to really bother me, like, why can't all moms get this? Why do you have to qualify for WIC to get it? I think all moms should get the breastfeeding support like WIC moms do, because everyone can encounter issues. So that would be another thing I think we can work on is, as a country, is providing better support for breastfeeding moms, for all moms, regardless of their age. Okay, I want to give you guys. So let's tie it back to, we have causes listed here, but why do you think ours is so bad? We talked about healthcare costs, that's one of it. Why else though do you think the United States has such atrocious infant mortality rates compared to other countries that don't have near the fancy healthcare systems that we do?
It's not easy for most people to access healthcare.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's one of the things. So we don't have the best access to healthcare. I don't know if you guys have been keeping track, but have you noticed how many hospitals are closing, rural hospitals? That's scary. Okay, what else? Think about what I said about WIC and nutrition. If we're not taking good care of pregnant moms, what's that gonna lead to? Unhealthy babies, right? And what we have in this country is we have a disproportionately high number of very low birth weight infants. It has nothing to do with when they're born. It has everything to do with how much they weigh when they're born. So we have a lot of infants born at what's considered very low birth weight. Okay, so just so you guys know, low birth weight babies are under 2,500 grams, just regular low birth weight. So under 2,500 grams, which is approximately equivalent to 5 pounds, 8 ounces. But to be qualified as a very low birth weight infant, that's under 1,500 grams, which is approximately 3 pounds and 3 ounces, or 3.3 pounds, I said. So what I'm saying is part of what's attributing to our way too high for the resources we have is that we have a lot of babies born weighing less than 3.3 pounds. And just to give you guys an idea, we already talked about the infant mortality rate is right now, right? So we did 5.8, and then in 2018 it was 5.6, 5.5 in 2019, 5.4 in 2020. But the mortality rate for very low birth weight infants compared to these 5s is 209. So what is that saying to you? For every 1,000 babies born that are low birth weight, very low birth weight, 1 out of 5 of them is going to die. So that gives you some perspective on why birth weight impacts outcomes. And mom's health impacts babies' weight, baby's health, outcomes. Yep.
So you said that we keep moving the age of viability up. Does that have anything to do with low birth weights, or like this?
No,
The same number in all
that's a
the
good
countries?
question. They're not really related. What I meant by the age of viability is that, and this kind of relates to Roe versus Wade, if you guys ever look back at how they made decisions about abortion law, back when that was a big issue of deciding was in the 70s, they would, babies couldn't survive outside of their moms after like 30 weeks or 35 weeks. So it did, there weren't as many issues with if somebody miscarried or had an abortion, they couldn't survive anyway type of thing. As that number has ticked earlier and earlier, that's why it became a debate about late-term abortion. So when we say age of viability, what we're talking about is if a baby was to be born at 24 weeks, 25, what is the likelihood they can survive? For a long time, they would say that it's not possible to survive before 24 weeks because of the lung maturity issues. It just wasn't compatible with life. However, we keep saving the lives of babies before that, and so I was just theorizing that at some point I think they'll change to 23. But when I say age of viability, it's what the consensus is of where the baby is physiologically to even be compatible with life outside of the womb.
Yeah. Well, so do you think that, like, because our age of viability is at the 24 weeks, like, is it at
No, yeah, I know what you're saying.
other countries too, or do you think they try to keep
No,
it in longer?
because even in our country, our problem is, because of course we know those babies are gonna be low birth weight, we know that.
Yeah.
We have a high proportion of very low and low birth weight infants, even for term babies. That's the problem.
Fully termed.
Yes. Or early preterm, but they should be 5 pounds, 6 pounds. We shouldn't be having somebody, and I think it has to do with prenatal care and the health of how we take care of moms. So we know a 24-weeker is gonna weigh like 2 pounds if we're lucky. But besides even when you adjust for gestational age, because low birth weight it lumps all the gestational ages together. When you say small for gestational age, you're saying how big it is for a 24-weeker or for a 26. When we say low birth weight, we're just using that 3.3 pounds as a cutoff. So regardless of NICU care, yes, we do have good NICU care, but we even have babies being born close to term or that shouldn't be that small that are. I'm not sure if that makes sense. Does it? It gets very confusing talking about gestational age and weight, because sometimes we talk about them together and sometimes we don't. Yep.
So to clarify, the 209 and 1,000 births, that's for very low or low?
Very low. I didn't give the one for low. 5 point whatever when you average all deliveries, compared to when you look at just very low birth weight, it's a 1 in 5 chance they won't make it to that birth.
So the average is the 5.8?
Yes. That's for all live births. So the main point I was trying to get to was just to recognize, and this will make more sense when we're in clinicals, that for a country with so many food and healthcare resources that we have a disproportionately large amount of babies being born at very low birth weights. And that, have you guys heard of like the March of Dimes? Hello.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi. What class are you looking for?
This one, and like,
Is it GE 101?
yeah,
It's probably on Tuesday or Wednesday, not today.
okay.
Does it say Braden next to it as the instructor? Okay, it should be Tuesday or Wednesday,
Okay.
one of those. So I'll see you tomorrow or Wednesday,
Okay.
okay? Okay. Okay. I'm gonna finish my thoughts. Any questions?
Do you also think, because I've thought about this too, like with the amount of food demand, like the amount that we have to have it so fast, everything's not any natural.
Oh,
That-
yeah, I mean, food science and the food crap that we shove down our, I mean, yeah, that's a whole other, yeah. And we have plenty of food in the country, but we don't, I mean, that's where the obesity part of it comes, you know, where some of us are overly large and have too much to eat and eat the wrong stuff. Or we pour soda down our throat, or we eat, you know, and then you've got people who don't even have the basics of what they need. Then you look at cost. To go buy fruits and vegetables is more expensive than a bag of chips and cookies. That's insane. Have you guys ever done any investigation on how, like, if you have a low income, you try to live off of a low income and try to eat healthy, it's nearly impossible. And that's crazy, right? The healthy food should be the stuff we can easily get, not the other way around. So I think what gets us here is all those things, the way we spend healthcare dollars, what we call nutrition, chemicals that we put into our food, chemicals that we put into everything we use, you know, I mean.
Yeah, food and everything has a lot to do, anything in there.
Yeah, and none of these things have simple, quick solutions. You know, these all take generations to turn around slowly, so. But it's how we got here. Okay, so we already did this one. Let's do maternal mortality. Okay, so this is a slightly different definition. Number of deaths of women while pregnant or within 42 days. Now, I will go ahead and interrupt myself and say that some of the things that I see focus on the 6-week mark, others will focus on the 1 year. Now, please recognize that many occur in those first 6 weeks, so it's very rare. But they're starting to look more at, you know, somebody who had preeclampsia, then develops chronic hypertension, and then goes on to have a stroke 6 months later. If they think the pregnancy exacerbated that, they would still consider that in the 1 year mark.
Death by suicide.
I don't think so. If they can talk, yeah, and that's another reason they look at the year, which we'll talk about more later, but postpartum depression has very different presenting symptoms in new moms, and it's not always right away. So I've known moms who have a 6 or 7 or 8 month old, and they're going through some issues, and I'm usually the one hearing it secondhand from someone else, but I'm like, has she been checked for postpartum depression? You know, and I don't think people think of it that way because that seems so long ago. But absolutely, the amount of changes that her body goes through that first year can still, but yeah, if it's suicide related to that. Okay, so and this is another reason it's so hard to measure the statistic, because it's within 42 days of termination of a pregnancy, which is that postpartum period, puerperium, irrespective of the duration and the site of pregnancy. So if it's a miscarriage, or it was an elective abortion, or if it was an ectopic pregnancy that they had to give medication for, that's a different site than the uterus, but it would still count in the statistic. From any cause related to or aggravated by the pregnancy or its management, but not from accidental or incidental causes. So with the suicide example, if they can relate that to mental health worsening, absolutely. If it's like a freak car accident that she didn't cause, they would not count that. If they determined that she had a stroke while driving because her blood pressure's been high since, then they might count that. So that's why this is actually hard, because they have to, they have to sometimes investigate, like, what started what was the cause, if they can even determine it. And so that's why oftentimes when you're looking at mortality statistics, I'm actually surprised I found the ones for 2020, because sometimes it takes 3 or 4 years before you can even find a statistic. Like usually when I give this lecture, the most recent data was from 3 or 4 years ago, because they're still assessing the past couple of years. Okay, and notice this is per 100,000 live births. That's different than the infant ones, that's per 1,000. Okay. Let's go over the current maternal death mortality rates for the U.S. first. Okay, I'm going to give you guys the last few years for, I have 2018 on here, but I'm going to give you guys several. Okay, so maternal mortality rate for the U.S. in 2016 was 16.9. 2017 was 17.3. 2018, 17.4. 2019, 20.1. And 2020 was 23.8. All right, so those were the US CDC ones. Just to give you guys some perspective, the global maternal death rate is somewhere around 152. Now, that makes ours sound good, right? If 152 women are dying from every 100,000 across the world, that's way higher than the numbers I just gave you for the US, right?
You said worldwide is 162?
152 for worldwide, which is actually down. It used to be around 215.
You give us percentages though, not the actual number.
No, I gave you the number
Number
Okay,
per
that's
100,000.
what I was
Yeah.
questioning.
That's what the
The WHO's it is the 152. Yeah. So when you see the world one, 152 compared to the numbers I just gave you for 2016 for 2020 for us, what does it look like? Looks like we're doing good, right? Overall, compared to them, the rest of the world, that's what it looks like. Okay. But there's some really big problems with our statistics. It is going up. And the last 2 years, those are huge jumps. From 2018 to 19 and 19 to 20, that's a 6-point jump. That's insane. Okay, so I do want you guys to know that while the U.S. infant mortality rate is trending down, the maternal mortality rate in the US is trending up. And it has been for a long time. Okay. What do you think the biggest problem with our statistics are? Okay. One of the biggest problems is, first of all, the number is embarrassing compared to what types of resources we have. But what's really embarrassing is that a large portion of these are preventable. That's the problem. From the CDC, they believe about 3 in 5 pregnancy-related deaths can be prevented. So 60% they believe are preventable, which is, that's embarrassing, right?
Can you give me an example, like, preventable, one that would prevent?
Oh, I mean, a lot of it is the same as like what you see in the rest of the hospital. You know, how long were her blood pressures trending up and no one did anything and no one reported it, and then she stroked and died when no one was in her room. She lives in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, or Dockwood, and the closest hospital is 250 miles away, and she starts abrupting and can't get help or can't get anyone to take her seriously. And she dies from hemorrhage.
Yeah, my sister lives in a rural area, she
Mhm.
hemorrhaged and,
Hello. Are you looking for GE 101? You're not the first one that stopped by.
Yes.
But that's my sister. She's there. Yes, so do you have to show them? Yep. Well, we are so happy to see your face. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you Wednesday. Okay. That's kind of funny that she told me that. Because I was like, maybe they moved it to Monday and they probably, I don't know. I like how she walked in like, sure she was in the right place. All right. Okay. Did I finish my previous lab? Yeah. That's all right. Thanks, Debbie. Okay, and so obviously you guys know where I'm going here, that our rates compared to other nations also embarrassing, abysmal, terrible. This is a little bit dated as well, but it's just showing, this is countries though. But certain countries, you can see there's an increase, which is not what, we don't want to be increasing our mortality rates. And then other countries have found ways, and look at these country names. I know we don't know everything about these countries, but they don't have complex healthcare systems like we do. Not all of them do, some of them do. But look at this. That's what they're dropping.
They have social health care.
Yes.
I think the worst part too is the increases, like, we're almost in the list, I don't know, like any of those.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, here we are increasing with them.
But I think many countries have probably healthier populations, and they put their resources into preventative public health measures. Have you guys ever seen that article? I thought it was Finland. I can't remember. About, I think it's Finland, but it's one of those countries up there where they were giving everybody having a baby like a box.
The baby box.
The baby box. And it had supplies in it, but the wooden box was supposed to be a safe place for them to.
Yeah.
Was it Poland? Okay,
Yes.
a safe place for them to sleep.
Yeah.
And after doing that, their rates, like their infant mortality rates dropped. They had other things as well, but it was like a safe sleeping place. Or they would tell people if you don't have like a crib, you can use a drawer, like take a drawer out and sit, like, how simple, and that's dropping rates, but look at all this stuff that we register for here that are unnecessary. And we spend crazy amounts of money on. And look at our rates. So just interesting if you guys ever see that baby box article. Okay, I want to finish up for today. What I didn't go over yet is the causes of maternal mortality. So before I actually give you the official results, what ideas do you guys have about what's killing moms across the world? You know, as related to pregnancy. Hemorrhage, okay?
Stroke.
You say stroke, okay?
Infection.
Infection, okay? Anything else? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna give you guys a couple of lists here, and I do want you to know the difference between these lists I'm giving you, okay? So the first thing I'm gonna talk about is historically. In the US, what are the three things historically that were what killed us, okay? And they're not the same now. Just want you to know historically what we viewed as the biggest threats to moms having babies. Okay, number one, historically, was hemorrhage. Number two was hypertensive disorders. And so preeclampsia would fall under that. Hypertensive disorders. And then the third one that was the historic cause of death for moms in the US was thromboembolism. Now I'm going to give you historically what the top 4 causes have been for the world, the global maternal mortality rate. Some are the same and some are different. So for the whole globe, the top 4 things have been hemorrhage, hypertensive disorders, such as preeclampsia, infection, and then the 4th one they tack on there is unsafe abortion.
So the first one was the US and the second was global.
What'd you say?
The first historical ones were
The US,
Okay.
yeah. And I gave you 3 on that list. And on the world historical, the first 2 should be the same, hemorrhage and preeclampsia or hypertensive disorders. And then where it starts to drift off, for the world, it was then infection and unsafe abortions. And I don't think those are necessarily ranked. I don't care what order you know them in, I just want you to know the causes, okay? Now, the reason I give you the historical background is that is what, for centuries, we knew was causing problems. And so, when we look at our statistics now, what the CDC will note is that a lot of our historical problems, so deaths from hemorrhage and hypertensive disorders and things like anesthesia have declined. But instead now what we have is we're seeing things like cardiovascular disease, stroke, and other medical conditions increasing in the causation. So that kind of makes sense to me. We did good focusing on what the problem was, and while that happened, other problems came up. So now I want to tell you what the current top few are. So the last data from the CDC, this is the current top maternal mortality causes in the US, current. Okay, the number one, 16.2% is what's called other cardiovascular conditions. Second current largest cause at 13.9% is infection and sepsis. No, not the percentage, just the order.
What was the first percentage?
We don't have.
You don't have to know
Oh,
that
okay.
one, but it was 16.2. I just wanted you guys to have perspective of what proportion we're talking about. Okay, that was second, and then the third one at 12.5% is cardiomyopathy. Okay. Look at that list and look at the historical US list. And what do you notice?
Like, these are things that we've done from school.
That's a good point. Some.
Well, what was the what was the historic, what was like a general year versus now? Do you know?
Oh, I mean, when I say historical, it's basically since the beginning of time.
Okay.
Here's what's been going on. These
Yeah.
have always been big problems,
Okay.
but you don't have to know like a specific year range.
Okay.
What do you notice the difference though? The list I just gave you was the current CDC data for what the top killers were in the 2016 to 2018 range for US moms. Yeah, heart is a big thing sticking out there.
More like weight-related issues.
Yeah, and don't they sound like med-surg things? I'm lying when I say these are young, healthy people, right? Or I didn't think I was, and apparently I am. I think those two lists are drastically different. And think about hemorrhage and preeclamptic disorders. Those are tied to the pregnancy, right? These other things sound to me like something the pregnancy is probably aggravating, which is just very different. So I do want you guys to know the difference between those because I think it teaches us a lot. I believe I put in my announcement, and you probably saw it posted, but I have a couple of articles posted underneath this PowerPoint. The first one, I think it says, I forget what it's called. What's the one that's about? I don't know, the first one's the big one. I can't remember if it says something.
Black moms die in childbirth 3 times as often as.
Except in North Carolina. Is that the first one or the second?
That's the second one.
Okay, what's the first one say?
California, this one.
Thank you, California. I knew it was something else. So that first one's the big one. It's kind of a long article, but I do want you guys to take time to read it, and we're going to discuss it at some point. But it's a really good discussion, and it's, I think in both of the articles, there's a little tiny bit, there's a spot where the things get a little bit political, and that is not my intention to push any sort of political agenda on you guys. But I just thought a lot of the points they made were really, really good and relate to stuff we're going to be talking about all semester. And it's actually a few years old. Ever since then, there's been a lot more attention that maternal mortality is getting at state and federal legislative levels. Even the disparity, which we'll talk more about, the disparity between racial groups, that's getting a lot of attention. And so we'll talk about that in the next class period. But make sure if you haven't yet read that article to start on that, okay? We're going to go ahead and conclude. Any questions before we stop? And I think tomorrow we're meeting at 1:30.
Is this PowerPoint chapter 1 or is this a chapter?
I think I